time for Sunday morning public access programming on this Hawaii Media radio station. Happy Sunday morning to I'm Johnny Barrow, and we're here with the Hawaii Media family of radio stations broadcasting from Oahu, Maui, and the Garden Isle, Kauai. Available also via your smart device at hawaiistream.fm and the app at Live 365. And joining me once again to discuss a very important topic in the news frequently, practically every day, and for good reason. Joe Can, Executive Vice President of Grassroots Institute of Hawaii. They have been covering a lot of ground on Maui especially, and what's been going on over there with the recovery efforts. And it's been progressing for about 6 months, with many displaced residents staying in hotels and the infrastructure rebuilding happening, but the costs, well, they're starting to rise. And already the state legislature is thinking about cutting the budget by 15%, and the county may experience some deep budget cuts as well. So once again, Joe Kent, Executive VP of the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii. Good Sunday morning to you, Joe, and thanks for joining me this morning.
Good morning, Johnny.
Yeah, you were just in Lahaina recently, so how is the recovery going in your mind, in your opinion?
Well, slowly would be the word. It's plodding along really slowly, and I think there's a lot of hope that we'll see a bunch of housing spring up where the survivors of the Lahaina disaster can go to. But I think it's going to take a lot longer than people think. I'm looking at timelines that show not this presidential election, but the next presidential election 4 years from now. It's going to take that long to just get the infrastructure rebuilt, let alone the housing. And the infrastructure has to come before the housing. So, it's a very slow prodding process. In the meantime, you've got many people who are struggling with the short-term situation of where are they going to live. You have around 2,000 households that are in the hotels in that area, and that's getting to be really expensive and also frustrating for the people in those hotels.
So initially they were pretty averse to talking about this just because of the devastation to their lives, but what now are people on the ground? What are they saying over there?
Well, they miss their kitchens, I think. Of course, there's the tragedy and the heartache of the Lahaina disaster that happened more than 6 months ago. But right now, they're struggling with their daily lives, and in hotels, you don't have kitchens, you don't have a hot plate, you don't have in some cases refrigerators, and you're not allowed to bring any of those things in. So it's very inconvenient for people who might want to, shop at a grocery store and cook a meal. In the meantime, the food that they are being provided is hotel food, and it's expensive hotel food. Think, Maui Brewing Company, burgers and fries and things like that, and it's expensive for taxpayers too. The total bill for the daily stay at these hotels is around $1,000 per household. That's a big bill if you think about how much does it cost to stay in a hotel on Maui. It might be $500 a night, but for the displaced Lahaina residents, that bill is around $1,000. That's the Red Cross's bill, by the way. They are providing the wraparound services. So it's not just the $500 hotel price, but the food and the parking and all of the different services that Red Cross provides, that totals to be $1,000 per household. And so, I think taxpayers are about to get really frustrated because it's just costing so much. But I think even the Lahaina residents in the hotels, what they're telling me anyways, that they don't want to be there either. They would much rather be able to find a place to live.
Yeah, so what you're saying is their out-of-pocket costs are not paying for the $1,000 expense. You're saying that is exclusively coming from Red Cross?
So that cost is shared between the federal government and the state. And so the $1,000, you've got FEMA paying for $900 of it, and the state of Hawaii paying for $100 of it. But that's only for half of the 2,000 people. That's only for 1,000 households. The other 1,000 are deemed as ineligible for the FEMA funds, and that's because of they might be undocumented workers. They might not be U.S. citizens. It might be difficult to find their records, their information about where they did stay in Lahaina, or their insurance information. So there's a lot of sort of bureaucratic reasons why that FEMA can't pay for them. But if FEMA can't pay, then that leaves the state of Hawaii, and so that's the big surprise for state legislators looking at the budget, because they thought they would only have to pay around $200 million, and now they're realizing it's around $600 million. So now they're scratching their heads and wondering how they're going to pay for this.
Joe Kent, Executive Vice President of the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii, joining us this morning. I believe you mentioned it, but you can remind us how many people are displaced or in hotels right now, Joe?
Okay, so there are around 3,000 people that are displaced. That number was around 7,000 people after the fires. But a lot of people have found their own housing or accommodation. Some people have moved away. But if you look at the households, that's around 2,000 people in hotels right now.
I think Mayor Bisson mentioned 1,500. Is that just Maui residents, or Maui residents have left, or is that just the affected area, those people, that many people?
Okay, so the 1,500 is around the amount of units that FEMA has purchased in West Maui. So that number might apply to that, but the FEMA eligible households are 1,000, and the FEMA ineligible households are around 1,000 as well.
You mentioned the expense of that. Did you delve into why is it so expensive? It seems like it can only be expensive, right? This massive recovery, right? I mean, you can't do this inexpensively. It's going to cost money.
Well, West Maui is one of the most expensive places to live in the world, period. And so now, when you offer market or above market rates for that housing, it gets really expensive. And it's so expensive that it's kind of warping the market there. The FEMA is offering rental prices far above what would normally be seen on the market, and that's just so they can make sure they secure the places. It's even higher than the state is able to pay. It's an interesting tug of war going on. The state is also trying to find units that it can pay the rent for to help to pay for the displaced Lahaina survivors, but it's getting outbid by FEMA. And so some homeowners or landlords are saying, like, no, state, we don't want to rent to you. We want to rent to FEMA because they give us more money.
Yeah.
In the meantime, you've got renters who are not displaced from Lahaina, but they are just renters that were not part of the disaster, getting pressure to either be kicked out or move away or leave, so that it can make room for a former Lahaina resident, and then the higher monies that come with that. So yes, this is an expensive problem, and maybe too expensive.
Yeah, they just had couple stories about people getting charged quite extensively. They looked at their what their rent would be to, to live, because they have been told that they're not going to have their lease renewed, and then they go around searching for one for a family of 2 or 3 or 4, and it's like it was $10,000 one quote, maybe even $6,500 a month to get by. No, you can't do that unless you're making quite a lot of money anywhere, especially on Maui. Now, Joe, is you mentioned the percentage of a potential budget cut. How is that going to affect the state and county budgets?
So the only way the state can pay for this surprise $600 million bill that FEMA is saying we're on the hook for is by cutting. And well, I guess they could increase taxes or they could take on more debt, but that just makes all the problems of cost of living worse. So cutting is the real way to do it. But the budget cuts are pretty extraordinary. We haven't seen budget cuts like this talked about since the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And even then, the budget cuts weren't actually implemented during the pandemic. So 15% of the Department of Education budget, for example, that budget is $2 billion. So, we're talking about perhaps $300 million shaved off. This is like Furlough Fridays level of budget cuts, which, it's a good thing actually to look at how can we cut the budget. And if you look back in time compared to like 2016 when Hawaii had a lot more people, our budgets were a lot smaller. Now we're used to big budgets with fewer people, but part of that is inflation too. So now county lawmakers are digging deep, and they're also stopping all grant funding and most capital improvement projects. They're putting the brakes on basically all discretionary spending, but they're looking at the counties with a microscope right now, because they're saying, okay, counties, we're, digging deep for this. Now, what about you? And at the last hearing at the state capitol, legislators were grilling council members about how much their budgets will be cut. And the county budgets haven't come out yet. They come out in March, so we'll see what happens there. But the county budgets have been really decimated too, so much so that the county is asking the state for an extra $400 million. That's on top of the $600 million that they already have to pay, the state has to pay. So we're talking about nearly $1 billion of surprise expenses that's just been handed to lawmakers and taxpayers.
And when you're talking about the grant monies, the funding from grants, that's nonprofits that are affected by that. So a lot of them will be affected, and then people will rely on some of those services. So as far as the housing, is that being built, the emergency housing in West Maui? And what are if not, what are those main barriers to building the housing over there, Joe?
Yeah, so all of these costs are really the cost of not having housing. If we had housing, we wouldn't have to pay for all these really expensive options that we're going through right now. But housing is notoriously hard to build in Hawaii, and on Maui especially. West Maui particularly is a water-protected area. The State Commission on Water Resources Management has designated West Maui as a more protected zone, so that makes it much more difficult to get water permits there, which would be needed for any new housing. I mean, there's 140 permits already sitting in the queue that have nothing to do with temporary housing or emergencies or anything. This is just the backlog of 140 permits that are waiting. And so any new permits for any temporary structures that FEMA wants to build, or the states or nonprofits, any new projects like that would have to wait at the back of the line. Now, this line takes long, too. I mean, some people in the line have been waiting for over 10 years, over 20 years for their permit. So I'm not exactly sure how they're going to get through this. Now, they had a water commission meeting recently about this issue, and someone asked, is there a way to fast track this? And they kind of got laughed out of the room because, the water commission is notoriously difficult to get through. So in any case, FEMA is still trying to build 200 units, and the state is trying to build around 500 units. You've got nonprofits that have smaller projects like 100 units here and there, but so far there's no housing to show for it.
Oh, yeah. All right, and we're talking also about those micro units. Yeah, the developer from Japan brought in, and also from Europe, some housing flown on in there. Are these going to be structures, or are these going to be the mini houses, like the 400 square footers or even smaller than that, just to get people a roof over their heads and a place where they can live comfortably? But we're not looking at massive houses. We're looking at more micro units.
Yeah, there actually have been some micro units built. There's one project run by the Family Life Center near King's Cathedral in Kahului. That's in central Maui, and they 2 days after the fires in Lahaina in August said, we want to build. And the problem is they didn't have any permit to build.
Yeah.
And the structures that they're trying to build are in a regulatory gray area. They're allowed to build as long as they say it's temporary and that the units will be destroyed. You know, how ironic is that? You can build as long as you destroy it.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of what the rules say on agricultural land. If you want to build a bunch of units, even micro units like that, you can do so if it's temporary. But there's no permit for temporary emergency structures like that. So lawmakers have to invent it. And the King's Cathedral and Family Life Center, in the meantime, are just building it, hoping that the lawmakers align whatever laws they come up with to whatever has already been built. Maud Cummings at the Family Life Center told me that if they have to cut the buildings in half, they will. But they're just building it anyways. So there are around 50 units that are standing right now, right there. But they don't have people in them because they can't get a permit.
All right. Joe Kent with the Grassroot Institute of Hawaii, Grassroot Institute of Hawaii, Executive Vice President, grassrootinstitute.org, grassrootinstitute.org for more on that and all their great papers that they put out and news items. A lot of information available there for you. Joe recently on Maui talking to the people and looking things over. And this is just came in the news, and he's upset, the governor, Joe, threatening to ban short-term rentals, and he's using some language we haven't heard since the Governor Abercrombie. Let's put it that way. He's getting a little upset. But what would that actually accomplish? Some people saying it won't really accomplish anything, banning short-term rentals.
Well, there's legal questions about whether you can do that, by the way, ban short-term rentals. But the governor, nonetheless, is threatening to ban them if he's unable to get the number that he needs for the housing the recovery efforts. It's interesting because a couple of weeks ago he announced that he has all the short-term rentals he needs. And by the way, there have been many short-term rentals who say that they will participate in this program. So it's not like all of them are saying no. But then it was kind of surprising to me yesterday when I saw the governor announce that he doesn't have enough, because I thought that he said he did have enough. And I'm sure short-term rental owners must be confused too. But council members, interestingly, are a little more hesitant to ban short-term rentals because that makes up the biggest part of their revenues. Short-term rentals on Maui bring in around $200 million per year, and which is the biggest revenue item in the budget. So if you were to ban that, that would actually hurt the county's efforts to rebuild. And so county lawmakers pushed back and said, please don't ban them all because we still need our budget. At the state side, though, the state actually would be okay to ban them because the state is paying for all the costs of the hotels. And if you move them from a hotel to a short-term rental, it saves on the state's cost. So there's a tug of war going on right now over that issue. But in the meantime, I would caution the state against doing this because we've already seen some short-term rentals voluntarily apply to this, and we might get there without a ban needed.
All right, Joe, a few more questions with the time remaining on this Sunday. The water, huge issue. We found out about it post-fire, of course. A lot of the questions are all evolving around that, who has the rights and what to do with that, and the emergency situation, which happened on August 8th. So what's going on with the water, West Maui, and is that getting in the way of building housing?
Yeah, so the water at the county level is okay. In other words, the Water Commission says that if you use county water, then you don't need a permit. You can use it all you want, and you can build emergency structures or temporary structures or any housing. The problem is that the emergency structures that are being proposed are not near the county water sources. They're near the private water sources, which are north of Lahaina, and those or south of Lahaina, and those sources are locked down as far as the Water Commission is concerned. You do need to get a brand new permit, and so that's the problem with in Ka'anapali. FEMA has proposed building 200 units there. Up in Kapalua, there's a private project that's 50 units. I think that's sort of a goodwill project, but it may have problems getting water. And then the state is also trying to build, and so it may be that these projects are thwarted just by the simple inability to get approval from the Water Commission.
That's what it sounds like, yeah. All right, a lot of federal aid money. You mentioned that, and the cost $600 plus $400 million potentially going into the island of Maui and how is this affecting the recovery efforts over there? A lot of the federal aid money going in there. How is it affecting the recovery, Joe?
Well, the aid money is pouring in by the droves, but somehow no one seems to be able to know where it's going or get any of it.
Unbelievable.
A lot of the money, and we're talking about billions, is going to the infrastructure. So you've got the roadways need to be replaced, the sewage lines, the pump stations, the water treatment plants, the disposal sites. All of these things need to be taken out and rebuilt from scratch. And that can take 4 or 5 years. I'm looking at roadmaps that say it won't be done until the year 2030. And so if that is required before housing can be built in Lahaina, then it's just going to take so long. But along with these long-term costs, you also have the short-term costs of, the hotels and the $1,000 per night. And there's a back and forth happening with the state about, can we push some of these costs back onto FEMA? But for FEMA and the Red Cross, of course, their services are very welcome, but after a while, it gets really expensive. And FEMA and the Red Cross are highly skilled at making sure that their costs are cut when it needs to be. And so I don't think there's any guarantee for state lawmakers that they can push the cost back onto FEMA. This is not FEMA's first rodeo. And what we see is that on February 2025, FEMA is scheduled to go away. And when that happens, the question about long-term costs appears in state law, in the state budget, and in taxpayers' wallets, because how long is this going to take, and when will be the end date of all this aid?
We heard only one offer to a Lahaina resident that just came out in the news. Sounded like there were good reasons to accept that offer from whoever purchased it. I can't recall. But are people there hearing about big-time investors, big money investors? Because that was rumored and discussed amongst the people. Is anything like that being discussed, and are people still talking about that, or what are you hearing as far as the land over there and the acquisitions? Have they put a stop to all that?
Well, I haven't heard much about the foreign investors coming in and swooping up the Lahaina properties. But even if they did want to do that, they would have to wait until the year 2030 too.
Yeah.
2030 as well, in order to rebuild. So, for some families, it may actually make sense to sell the properties that they owned and move somewhere else. Hopefully, they could stay on West Maui, and if they made it easier to build on the west side, you could have the housing for free. You wouldn't need to pay anything for the housing, because there's so much demand and incentive to build there, even affordable housing. If the regulatory certainty was a little more clear, and if lawmakers just make it easier to build.
So to wrap it up, Joe, what are lawmakers currently saying about this situation?
Well, lawmakers are kind of going back and forth with each other. At the state legislature, there were a lot of pointing fingers and a lot of scribbling down numbers too, because the different agencies didn't seem to have the same numbers when it came to how many people we're talking about. And so they kept going back and forth about, is it 1,000? Is it 2,000? Where did you get that number? Some lawmakers pointed to the 800 homes that were damaged in Puna during the lava flow in 2018 on Hawaii Island. None of those victims received anywhere near the same level of funding or support that's now being given to the Lahaina survivors. And so it was interesting that some lawmakers brought that up. Others worried that the public may not accept 15% budget cuts across the board for too long to help with the Lahaina recovery situation. And then the state lawmakers were asking the county lawmakers, what are you going to do to cut your budget? So there was just a lot of pushing and pulling.
Yeah, it's been past 6 months now since August 8th. What are you hearing, if you've heard anything? This will be the final question about the State Attorney General's investigation.
Well, the State Attorney General was trying to get more information, and I heard she couldn't. She was asked about that during the legislative briefing earlier this week, and she said that it's going to start wrapping up as long as she gets the information she needs, but we're still waiting and seeing. So, that's as much as I know about that.
Yeah, it's been pretty tough to come by information on that investigation. How can they find all the great work you do at Grassroots Institute of Hawaii, Joe?
Well, you can find our work at grassrootsinstitute.org. And you can also find us on Instagram at Grassroot Hawaii. We have an email list that has around 45,000 people who get our stuff every week. And You can learn about the Lahaina situation or tax policy or what's going on with the healthcare situation in Hawaii and all kinds of other issues, cryptocurrency, on our newsletter at grassrootinstitute.org.
It doesn't cost anything. All it does is provide you with a lot of critical information, and then you'll know, what's going on. And it's all courtesy of the great people over there at Grassroots Institute of Hawaii. Have a fantastic Sunday. Joe Kent, Executive Vice President, and we'll be talking to you soon. A lot of topics out there still to be discussed. Have a great Sunday. We'll talk to you soon, Joe. Thanks so much.
Thank you.